Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm very excited to bring you kind of a part 2 review. This time we're going to be looking at Transformers Generation Select's Abominus. Abominus here was released right on the heels of Generation Select's Volcanicus, and I personally just happened to obtain them both at the same time. And the toy, as far as I know, is officially releasing in the United States as of today, which, when I record this, is June 9th. I've actually been waiting on this thing for nearly 2 months. If you want the details for that fun stuff, go ahead and see the beginning of my Volcanicus review. I won't gripe again. I'll try not to complain too much. But yeah, it's been a long wait on this guy. I should have had him a lot sooner. So, for anyone that doesn't know what this new Abominus is an update and upgrade of the Power of the Primes Abominus Combiner, which naturally means it's also an update of his individual components, the Terrorcons. And this new version opts for a more cartoon-inspired color scheme, as in keeping with Takara's tradition, and also adds some new parts and even some new tooling to existing parts, which we'll get a look at. So if you've seen my reviews before, you know how this goes. We're going to take a look at the toy's packaging, then we'll open it up. In this case, there's a couple layers to unpack here. Then we'll see the inside of the box and kind of our nice little tray, all the figures laid out. We'll see the instructions, and then we'll see the Terrorcons themselves in both their beast and robot modes. Then I'll progress naturally to Abominus himself. During this time, I'll be doing some group shots comparisons with the prior versions of these toys. Probably going to pull out some other combiners too for some group shots and, you know, maybe highlight some molding differences. And then at the end of the video, I'll be giving my final thoughts. So Abominus comes in your standard kind of outer packaging, just plain cardboard with some black text. You got your little Generation Selects logo here. You got the name right there in both English and Japanese. And that's really it. You know, barcode, name again. These are pretty minimalist bits of packaging here. So let's go ahead and open this up and see the inner box now. Okay, here's our inner box, and it's got this very cool line art render of the different Terrorcons here, all 5 members. Then Abominus himself, kind of blown up in the background. We got the logo, your Generation Selects, Abominus right here. And then on the back, big old Decepticon symbol with our G1 base grid pattern. Go ahead and just slide this guy off. And now here's the inner box itself. Big old Decepticon symbol again. Generation Selects. Cool little tech detailing. And we're going to go ahead and lay this down, open it up. And like on Volcanicus, I'll go free camera mode here, just so you can get a good look inside. There's our inner lid again with your Generation Selects logo. And here are the Terrorcons. Cutthroat, Sinnertwin, Rippersnapper, Blot, and Hun-Gurr. So you may notice that they don't look too terribly different from their initial releases. And it's true, like their colors aren't as altered as the Dinobots were. Mostly just less saturated in hue. The biggest difference right here is Hun-Gurr. He's got quite a bit going on differently. And once we get a hold of him, you'll see how his combiner chest area and, you know, beast stomach are a bit different. Here is the new combiner chest piece, which actually functions as kind of its own little unit called a Terror Breaster, because I guess they just thought that name was fine. Like, Terror Breaster, why not? You have a new gun, which is actually the same one that came with Select's Snap Trap and his Reed Echo. And you got the standard weapons for your guys that came with the Power of the Primes molds. You get the new Abominus feet, and these are actually new ones, so that's really cool. They're not just recycling the King Poseidon ones. You do get the King Poseidon hands, but they are done up in that nice magenta color now. So you do finally get an Abominus whose hands and feet are all the same color instead of each mostly being the color of whatever limb they're attached to. So that's good. I like the uniformity of it all. So yeah, that's what we get. And just like Volcanicus, these guys come out in 2 separate trays for ease of removal. Otherwise you just have a good old floppy tray there. Oh great, cool. Instructions got bent in the box. Thanks, Takara. Alright, let's flip this around. So you can see our little part layout with 5 Terrorcons, all the accessories. And then it should be very similar to Volcanicus's and, by extension, King Poseidon's, God Neptune's instructions, where it's going to start with the leader character, go from beast to robot. You notice that all these selects combiners so far have been like bestial combiners? Didn't really think about that, but yeah, totally are. I wonder if they're ever going to do vehicular ones. I mean, I'm not complaining. I love beast bots, you know me, big old Beast Wars fan. So yeah, you get some accessory stuff here. That's pretty new. You get your transformation, how to wield the accessories in robot mode, and then your combiner torso mode, and then it just goes on with the remaining members. Continues on to the back. Just like that. And then we get to the bottom, your little how-to for actually constructing Abominus and how to make his big old cannon, which this is something I really like. One of the biggest things I disliked about Power of the Primes and its combiners was a lack of combiner weapons. Right, Combiner Wars was generally pretty good about having some sort of accessories that would combine together to form a big weapon that looked good in the hands of the final combined form. Power of the Primes didn't do that. The only kind of exception is if you actually manage to collect Orthia over the course of like 3 toy lines, there is kind of a weapon you can construct for her, but it's never included in the instructions. You just kind of have to figure that out on your own. So finally, Abominus gets a big old cannon, so I dig that. Alright, so we've seen everything inside. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our guys one by one. Now you may not know it, but a sizable number of months have gone by since I filmed the last scene. This is so overdue at this point, and I do apologize for that. Unfortunately, sometimes, you know, I fall behind and things end up on the back burner, and it's really hard to recover things once they're there. So, after having waited a long time to finally get this thing delivered, I waited a much longer time to complete this review. So I do apologize for everyone that's been waiting on this, but without further ado, let's continue. So the first in-hand look we're going to get is a group shot of all of our Terrorcons in their beast modes. So going from left to right, we have Cutthroat, Blot, Hun-Gurr, Rippersnapper, and Sinnertwin. And you can see they look very, very similar to their Power of the Primes counterparts, especially our 4 limb bots. The biggest difference is just small paint applications here and there. Some plastic colors have been changed, but for the most part, they're very similar. Now, they are lacking the Prime armor that came with the Power of the Primes versions, because obviously we use a very different system for the hands and feet of the combiner here. So the most changed figure by far is Hun-Gurrr here. Can't see it too well, but he has a lot of retooling down here, and then he also comes with these new accessories. He has the combiner chest plate, the new big combiner gun, 2 smaller guns that are exclusive to him. And we do have our combiner kibble here, but there's not an official place to, connect those, so I'm just kind of leaving them out for this shot. So, this just gives you an idea of the general theme of these guys. They're just real creepy baddies. They come in all different shapes and sizes, but they're all some sort of, horrific monster. And now that we've seen them together, I'm going to treat this review a lot like I did for the Volcanicus review, where we're going to look at each individual bot in both their beast and robot modes, compare them with their Power of the Primes versions, do a robot group shot, and then see Abominus himself. Of course, I'll be comparing him to the other version of Abominus. I'll be swapping some parts around, doing some fun stuff, and you know how this goes by now. Alright, we're going to start with the leader of the team, the fearsome 2-headed dragon Hun-Gurrr. And you can see, in addition to sporting some changes to his color scheme, he's now rocking this big old weapons platform on his back, which is, comprised of the combiner chest, and then the large cannon, which is just recolored from the one that came with King Poseidon, God Neptune, and then these new small weapons right here that just attach to the sides of that to make it like a 3-barreled weapon. So he's just kind of a walking weapons emplacement at this point, who also has like fire-breathing heads on the front. So very fearsome looking, really just suits him as the leader of this team of monsters. Now, one thing you can do here, and they don't show the instructions, but it was kind of shown off in the manga or the comic that came like alongside him online. Just pop this off. Yeah, by the way, these little wing pieces aren't like firmly attached. They're just plugged in with 5mm ports, so they're very prone to just popping out when you mess with them. just to give you a heads up. But you can swing him out and actually give him wings to make him a flying dragon. That's something that he did, you know, in his own little manga there. They're dinky looking, they're really small, and they're a little too far back, but it is an option that you have. Now we talked about the combiner kibble, the hands and feet. Now one option that you do have here, and it's not official, but it's something you can do, is just attach him to his hind legs, just like you do for the Power of the Primes one. So they have these little posts here, so you can just put them on there. And I mean, they don't look like much of anything. You can just, you know, consider them, I guess, armor or something. Protect his hindquarters. I don't know. Loads him down pretty good. Little silly looking. Not as silly looking as Grimlock toting all of his combiner kibble. But, you know, if you just are determined to have somewhere to put the hands and feet because you don't like loose parts laying around, this is something that you can do. Now we get our comparison shot with the Power of the Primes Hun-Gurr. Now this right here is funny because this is the toy that started the entire in-joke of everything being a retool of Silverbolt. If you don't know the history behind that, when this toy was unveiled, a lot of people noticed that he had a lot of physical similarities to the Combiner Wars Silverbolt toy. In fact, he basically looks like Silverbolt just kind of laying on his back with his legs up in the air. And, you know, even his torso mode is very similar to that of Superion's. And this led a lot of people to believe that he was a retool of Silverbolt. It turns out he's not. They don't share any parts whatsoever, but he obviously was based very heavily on Silverbolt's engineering, right? I'm sure when they were trying to come up with an Abominus combiner for Power of the Primes, one of the designers, you know, in their shop was probably playing with the Combiner Wars Silverbolt and then figured out, like, oh, I can lay him on his back, put his feet up, and that kind of looks like Hun-Gurr. I'm sure there is a connection, but he isn't actually a retool of that character. But it did start kind of this running joke because people were so adamant about it that people started joking every time they'd see a new toy, like, that looks like a Silverbolt retool. And it's been persisting for years now. I think it's pretty funny when it pops up. I'm sure other people might find it annoying, but, you know, there's a neat little bit of fandom history there. So if you ever hear somebody, you know, say, hey, that looks a lot like Silverbolt and it looks nothing like him, that's why. Right now the story time's over. We can look at these two and we can see, you know, some pretty noticeable differences between them. One, the spikes on the neck have lost their paint from this toy. He also doesn't have the stickers along the sides of the neck like this one does because, you know, this is toy-based, it's cartoon-based. He gets gray accents on his front legs instead of pink. When you look at the hind legs here, this guy actually has paint applications to make them more white instead of just being completely gray. Loses the spike paint on the tail here. He does maintain the purple on the back spikes, though, interestingly. And now here is the combiner kibble I mentioned. The ones that hang off his back legs that you can, you know, kind of emulate with this guy's, you know, combiner hands and feet. And then even it's not super obvious because they're on all fours, but if we lift them up, you can see here's all the retooling right here. Very different chest pieces. His is, you know, more squat but thicker. His is longer but thinner. So yeah, they're pretty similar to each other, but there are a lot of key differences. This guy, like most of the Terrorcons in the set, loses a lot of color detail. And that's done specifically to emulate the cartoon, because the cartoon, you know, is drawn much more simply than the actual physical toys, because it's, you know, very time consuming to put all those fine details. So there tend to be a lot of block coloring involved with that. So that's why he looks the way he does compared to this guy, which is based much more heavily on the Generation 1 toy. Because that was still the focus during Prime Wars. And then when they switched over to War for Seibertron, they really had a change of heart with that. And in my opinion, it's often for the worse. Next, we get our pterodactyl-like monster, Cutthroat. Now, unlike Hun-Gurrr, Cutthroat actually is a retool of somebody. He is a retool of the Power of the Primes swoop toy, though he's a very heavy retool. Like, almost to the point to where it's almost not even fair to call them mold mates. But he does share some parts with Swoop, though so much about him is different that, you know, he feels like a different toy. He doesn't feel like you're getting the same thing. He's very unique. So you can see here, he's just got a long tail, he's got some big wings, he has his little weapon mounted to the middle of his back, And he's got these little two-clawed feet here. Now, one thing that the Power of the Prime's Cutthroat was infamous for was having a very loose head. And this guy's head is also pretty loose. Not as loose. It does stay up a little better. Unfortunately, his jaw is more loose. You can see it won't stay completely shut. It always opens about halfway. So you do kind of win some and lose some here. His head will actually stay up, but his mouth won't stay shut now. So, oh well. I guess you just can't win them all, right? Speaking of the Power of the Primes version, here that is. And these two are pretty similar. The differences between them are, you know, kind of sort of like the differences between the two hun-grrs. Some small, you know, color accent differences here and there, and some different parts when it comes to, like, the kibble and combiner bits. So their purples, you can see, are more or less the same. The greens are more or less the same. But this new Cutthroat's yellow is a lot more washed out looking and more pale than the old one. And then when it comes to the heads, you can also see that the head has lost a lot of color on the crest and the beak. Right here in the forehead, it lost the Decepticon symbol. He's traded out his silver claws for purple ones. A lot less detail underneath here. And then the other big difference is that whereas this guy has a completely green tail section, the tip of his tail ends up being purple. So, you know, there are some pretty significant differences between the two. Obviously, this guy includes a prime armor / combiner hand. This one doesn't. And I will say I do like the looks of the old one more. And you're going to see that being a pretty common theme here. Overall, I just find the Power of the Primes toys to be more colorful and more detailed than the new ones. Again, that cartoon aesthetic, it's not always a good thing. The cartoon wasn't always pretty to look at, so one of the things you're often going to find is that colors become a lot less varied and a lot more flat. And that's going to be a common theme through this whole set. Next up is Blot. Now Blot, I think, is my favorite of the 4 Limbots in this team. I just find his transformation to be very interesting. Basically the robot, like, just rolls up backwards and then, like, little monster limbs come out. So I think he's really cool. I like the look of him. It's very unique looking. And yeah, I mean, this version, you know, just works just as fine as the other one. All the tolerances are very good on it. He's got those big old claws. He's got his little back-mounted blaster thing here. He's just a really, really good-looking little monster. It is a shame his mouth doesn't open. That's one thing that always bothered me about him. I wish this actually opened instead of being one solid piece. But other than that, I think he's just absolutely fantastic in this mode. Here's his Power of the Primes comparison. And what's really interesting about these two is that out of all of the members of this team, they have the fewest differences between them. Like, they are almost identical. They seem to use the same plastic and paint colors for the most part. The chest details are the same here. The only differences that I've been able to spot are some sticker details. The old Blot just has one rub sign looking Decepticon symbol on top of his head, whereas this one gets 3, one on the forehead and then one on each shoulder. He also has this small little added detail here, this metallic blue paint. And then on the back, the knee details for the robot legs, they're mostly the same. They use the same colors, they're just laid out differently. This guy's mostly silver with little blue triangles. This guy's about half and half. Aside from that, at least in this mode, they're pretty much identical. So I don't know if I really have a favorite because they're so close. I think in this case I may actually prefer this one because he does have more, you know, symbols going on here, more tampo details, and they're a little nicer looking than the rub sign looking one. I mean, the rub signs are a really cool callback to the old toy, but from an aesthetic standpoint, you know, and a cool looking character, these just make a little more sense. And then he gets that added like metallic blue there, which looks really nice. So they're very, very close, and I think the new one edges out the old one just a tiny bit. Next on our list is Rippersnapper, the, I don't know, land shark, I guess you'd call him. A shark with legs, so he's a land shark, I guess. And he's one of the cooler toys too. I think I like him, you know, kind of second to Blot, which is funny because Blot's actually a retool of him, but I find Blot's, whole setup just a bit more interesting. But this guy's really cool too. He's got these cool like shoulder cannons. He's got these Wolverine-like claws. He's got these leonine legs here with the long feet. And then he's got his little shark tail on the end, dorsal fin. Just plenty going on here. Plus the shark mouth can open and close, which is always nice. Painted teeth. He's just a really cool looking figure. Maybe not as original as Blot, but still really neat nonetheless. And here's his Power of the Primes counterpart. And these two, they're not as similar as the two different takes on Blot, but they are still pretty similar. They have almost identical color and paint layouts, but the biggest thing between them is that the colors are changed up on the paint. So you can see here, the red shoulders become white, like the arms, which are also painted. These are left blue. Instead of getting these light blue claws, he gets more of a deep metallic blue. Trades out the rub sign sticker for Decepticon Tampo again. The chest pieces are very differently colored, as you can see. And the combiner peg is just a completely different plastic color. These are differently colored here. He traded out silver for blue. These are actually pretty much the same. That yellow vent detail there. And then when you get to the back, let's go ahead and take his prime armor off so you can see it better. You can see black used in place of red, and then the feet actually get an added splash of silver, whereas his are left bare. So, pretty similar to each other. It's hard to say which one I like more. I think I may prefer the Selects Beast Mode here, just a little bit more than the Power of the Primes. It's close, though, either way. And now we come to our final member's Beast Mode. This is our more diminutive two-headed creature, Sinnertwin. So he's just this, quadrupedal little monster. He's got two tails, he's got two heads. The heads have these nice little golden horns on them, and they're pretty articulated. So the necks can move up and down, and the heads move around on ball joints, and then the mouth can open and close on each head. So pretty neat. You can get quite a bit of posability out of here. Ball jointed shoulders here. You get bending elbows. These are on a mushroom peg and they're in like ratcheted positions, so they don't move too much because there's no knee bend or anything. But overall, he's pretty cool. He's got the little like weapon turret up top. He's just a neat looking little creature. I've never been super crazy about his colors per se. I think that bright yellow has always been a bit of an eyesore. But he's still pretty cool. He's got a lot of great molded detail and all that. And now we have our other Sinnertwin for comparison. And they're pretty similar. I consider these two like the Cutthroats as far as what differences they have. You get some colors swapped out, such as the green tail going to purple yet again. This guy actually has some interesting like fuchsia colored horns, and it's the only part of his body that's colored like that. This version opts for gold on the horns, and then he also swaps out some silver on the shoulders for more gold. These details are pretty much identical right here. Not a big difference there at all. Let's see. The Decepticon symbol is surprisingly similar. No rub sign thing going on, but they did make it smaller and lighter purple on the new one. So that's interesting. Teeth are all silver. And then we get some slightly different details here. So you do get a little more fuchsia here, which just goes to green. We keep the red, different colored peg. Yeah. So you kind of get the gist of, how these things go. Usually less color breakup in the plastic colors on these guys, and then generally, more painted and sticker detail here, but not always. Now, it's time to tackle the robot modes, so we're kind of cycling back, hitting up Hun-Gurrr again, and you can see, very tall, lanky robot mode. Big difference here is that his face is actually painted like that grayish-white color instead of being left magenta like his helmet. I'm actually kind of torn on that change. I don't know if I prefer the new face or the old face more. I will say the old face was a little more unique for his face and helmet to be the same color, but I don't know, it's not really a big deal either way. Here's this big old honkin' cannon, which again is comprised of really 3 separate guns. And then you get the chest piece being used as a shield, which is actually exactly how the original G1 toy did it. So that actually makes this guy a little more toy accurate than his counterpart. Here's all the new like back kibble stuff here. Transforms in a fairly different way than the standard one. I mean, the legs still kind of swing to the side and go up, but you have to move all this stuff out of the way first. You have to like fold it up and then fold this piece down. So overall, you know, very similar to the standard hun-grrr, but he's got some pretty key differences and, you know, mainly accessories and even a little bit with his tooling. And here's the Power of the Primes version for comparison. The face is, again, pretty much the quickest giveaway that these are different. He opts for the magenta face with silver goggles. It's just a different look. Yeah, I think I prefer this face a little more. I like the silver goggles. Really draws your attention to his eyes there. And I do like that he does seem to have a little bit more color detail. He's got some extra purple here. He's got blue on the shoulders. Still got those nice little sticker details along the sides of his legs. He's got a bigger backpack, which is probably a hit against him. That's a little too large, kind of silly looking. And then, of course, his accessory is just pale in comparison. He rocks the combiner feet as some sort of wrist-mounted little laser blaster things. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're not nearly as cool as a shield and a giant cannon. So, yeah, you know, these two are pretty give and take with each other. Now, as far as play value, this guy is clearly better. I mean, you can just have a lot more fun with his accessories and stuff. But I do still very much like the toy-inspired deco for this one. Now we can see Cutthroat's robot mode, and he's a very, very lithe individual, especially compared to his teammates. Which makes sense, because he is Tool from Swoop, who is, you know, kind of the lithe member of his team. So, you know, he's kind of got this almost Batman motif going on. It's got a very prominent helmet here. It's got the bird or pterodactyl head, whatever to call it, kind of just resting on his chest. Now, one thing you might notice is that on my copy, this crest becomes very crooked once you push it in. Like, when it's extended, it's fine, but when you push it in, it goes off to the side. So there seems to be a bit of a QC issue in mine. Not the most egregious thing ever, but it is kind of annoying because it's a little sloppy looking. He does seem to have fixed the floppy leg issue that came with the original Swoop tooling and a lot of the reuses and retools after that. His legs are actually pretty solid. He's got his little weapon here. I mean, he just works. You know, he's a pretty simple looking Transformer. I think he could have, you know, stood to be a little more fleshed out with some more accessories or something. But as part of a, you know, a box set, it's not quite as bad. You know, you're not wondering, oh, am I getting my, you know, deluxe price point worth of toy, because he's just part of a greater whole. Now we get our Power of the Primes version, and just like with the Beast mode, the old version has a lot more color breakup and added color than our new Selects guy here. One thing I will say, though, is that I do prefer the gold face of the Selects toy over the silver face of this one. I think it's a little too much silver for the face. Makes him look like the Tin Man. Not super crazy about it, but everything else I think I prefer on this guy. The deeper yellow, the added purple and all that. Greater detail on the shins. I think I'm about 90% in for this version. Now we get to see Blot again, and I think he's still my favorite design of the Limbots, even in robot mode. He's just a real bruiser, you know, he's very thickly built. His beast claws pretty much become like a brass knuckle type thing over his fists, and then he gets to mount his cannon on his shoulder, so he looks pretty battle ready, and he's got this just kind of ugly mug that just makes him look even more intimidating. What's funny is that he actually has this residual flap from the Power of the Primes version that flips down and has a 5mm port there, and that's, you know, where you would normally attach the Prime armor. Of course, this version doesn't come with Prime armor, so it renders that kind of useless, but, you know, it was cheaper for them to just leave that in there than to, you know, change the tooling just for that one little piece. Here's our Power of the Primes version. Now, unlike their Beast modes, the robot modes have some slightly more significant differences. and it's mostly here in the chest area. So he just gets a couple little red dashes here on the chest. He, however, gets all this silver and then a lot of yellow accents. And then he also gets a Decepticon symbol right there in the middle. They're very close still, but I think the added chest details have me leaning toward the Power of the Primes version in this mode just a little bit more. It's just nicer looking, helps break up all that dark blue. The Prime armor I couldn't really care less about. I always thought those were kind of extraneous looking anyway. But he can at least mount it to his chest. Or you could steal it from him and give it to that one if you want him to have some armor. Either way, they're both pretty solid, but I find this a lot more visually appealing right here. Moving right along, we get to see Rippersnapper again, and I think he also has a pretty cool robot mode. Not quite as cool as Blot's, but he's still pretty up there. He also maintains his beast mode's claws that he can use to, shred up his enemies, and then he gets these two shoulder-mounted cannons right here, though unfortunately they can only point up like mortars, so he has to do some kind of squatting position to really use them properly. He also gets the residual chest flap there, and this whole bit is nicely painted. Very, very nice looking. And he's okay. He's a little more bare bones than Blot, but still one of the cooler looking robots out of this set. And of course, here's his Prime Wars compatriot. They have a fair number of color differences again. You can see right there in the pelvic area, and then mostly on the chest. It's hard to say for sure, but I think I find myself preferring the chest of the new one a little more. I like the silver right in the middle. I think that looks really nice. I also like the silver painted feet there. And I do find myself liking the metallic blue claws more than these bright sky blue ones. So they're pretty close to each other, but I think the new one edges out the old one just by a little bit. And at last, we've circled all the way back around to our final member, Sinnertwin. So his robot mode, I find to be a little too boxy for my liking. It may be my least favorite out of the four smaller robots. It's not bad per se, I think it's just the least impressive. He does have a nice silver painted face here, got a lot of chest details, shin details, all that. The arms are okay. The little panels that they're on tend to flop back and forth a little. Doesn't affect too much, but it could be better. He's got some nice posability, all that. No ankle tilt, obviously, because this is, from before the days where that was, super commonplace. But he's alright. He doesn't get, a little flap or anything on his chest. He just has an open 5mm port for, where Prime Armor would go. And he's okay. Quite a bit of back kibble, but at least it's cool-looking back kibble, because it's dragon heads. I mean, dragon heads are always cool. So, yeah, he's not the most exciting robot, but he holds his own just well enough to get by. And we get to see his Prime Wars counterpart, and they're very similar looking in these modes. The biggest difference is the color of the combiner peg. The old one had a green peg cutting right through his yellow chest. This one actually swaps out the green plastic for yellow. I do believe I prefer the all yellow chest over the green one. Normally I like color breakup, but this just looks kind of sloppy and out of place. I do like the yellow eyes of the older toy more. As we know, the old Transformers cartoon, pretty much all the Autobots had blue eyes, all the Decepticons had red eyes, so, they changed his eye color to red to match that aesthetic. But I like it when Transformers have multiple different eye colors. I prefer yellow eye Soundwave over red eye Soundwave, for, one example. So I find myself liking the yellow on silver a little bit more than the red on silver. I think it just helps the eyes pop a little bit more. And now, let's get one final group shot for the robot modes before these guys shed their individual personalities and become the terrifying Abominus. So, just like in their beast modes, they make for a very, very good looking crew. They're all different shapes and sizes, still quite monstrous in appearance despite being in more humanoid forms. And yeah, I mean, they look like a very, very dangerous team of Decepticons, and, frankly, a very ruthless one that you probably don't want to cross paths with. Now, their colors are all over the place. They're not like the Dinobots where they're pretty much uniform. They are all doing their own thing, and there's almost no overlap between the colors. Even when you have colors that are similar, like maybe the yellows of Cutthroat and Sinnertwin, they're very, very different shades of yellow. The purples, everything, it's all very different. Which kind of lends itself to the, very just chaotic, borderline insane nature of Abominus himself. Like, he really is just an absolute head case of a combiner, so it makes sense that the different parts of him would be so very disjointed looking from one another. So yeah, whether they're combined or as individuals, they just make for a fearsome, chaotic spectacle, and I really like that. Now, for the moment I'm sure you've been waiting for, we finally get to see the assembled Abominus. And this guy looks absolutely fantastic. He uses the same hands, you know, from the other Selects combiners, which are quality hands. You know, the way they work is just so much more intricate than the old stuff. You get like this 2 hinged thumbs, so it can switch either way. And you don't have to worry about having like extra thumbs. You get articulated fingers that all move independently. Really, really nice looking. He gets the big old feet here, and you can see that the magenta colored like extra guns that were connected to the cannon now serve as heel spurs. So that's how he keeps his balance. They all have some way of doing it, and that's his. And then all the remaining weapons all combine into one large combiner weapon. So he's got a lot of advantages over the Power of the Primes version. He's got much better hands and feet, and unlike that version, he actually has a combiner weapon. One of the biggest problems with Power of the Primes is while they made some improvements over the Combiner War system, none of the combiners had dedicated weapons, which was a huge step back from Combiner Wars where they all did. So we finally get to rectify that mistake here and get, you know, a well-armed Gestalt to be able to actually, you know, fight at range instead of just being a big, you know, strength monster. Of course, he gets the new chest area here, which is much wider and more full-looking than the Power of the Primes one. My biggest thing that I'm still not sure I'm a fan of is the recoloring of the head. The toy colors Abominus head was a white helmet with a magenta face and yellow goggles. This one is kind of the inverse of that, where it's a magenta helmet, white or grayish white face, and then he uses red visor, red goggles. I don't like it as much as the toy colors. To me, that's the one way in which, you know, this Abominus is inferior to the older version. Everything else about him, though, is absolutely fantastic. He poses well, the ratchets are nice and strong, you can get all sorts of nice shots of this guy. With the combiners, I always like having them in these dynamic stances so that they don't look like just, you know, a bored stiff. They're actually doing something, and also highlights just how well they hold themselves up. So, yeah, this guy, awesome looking. I talked about those paint applications that were on the beast legs or robot arms of Hun-Gurr. They really shine here, and they're emulating, you know, the legs of the original G1 toy. Now, the toy was engineered, or, you know, the original toy was engineered very differently from this one. The original toy, the robot legs, or, you know, beast heads and necks actually became Abominus's legs too. So you actually had these little dragon heads on the knees. Now, he loses that, which is unfortunate because it was a very unique, interesting feature for Abominus that set him apart from other combiners. Obviously, that's nothing new to this release, because he just uses the same tooling, more or less, as the old one, you know, the Power of the Primes one. But it's still a shame that that really neat detail is just absent from, you know, the modern updates to Abominus. Now, of course, we have to have our comparison with the Power of the Primes version, so you can see the subtle differences between the individual bots are kind of washed out here. I mean, you can spot them out if you want to, but when you're considering the whole picture, they suddenly don't really matter that much, right? Like, these guys are similar enough to where not really a huge deal either way. Where the big, you know, noticeable differences come in is the entire center section, the torso section that's comprised of Hun-Gurr. The legs are quite differently colored here on the front, as you can see. And then you have this very, very different chest setup, right? He actually uses the pieces that are attached to Hun-Gurr to form the chest. Now, it's not as, you know, accurate to the original toy and everything, but it was a really nice touch. It's very stylish. You know, the beast legs become part of the chest area. He's got this panel which flips down that has the Enigma combination in there. Of course, you know, the new tooling means that this guy is no longer compatible with the Enigma. He can't actually store it anywhere. But honestly, it's a small price to pay. It was just a, Power of the Primes gimmick and something I think we could all live without. And then, of course, we can see the difference in the hands and feet. The feet are much, much larger on the new toy, which means he's going to be a bit more stable, right? He's got more surface area to plant his feet down. And the hands, not only are they just better built, but on him, they're magenta, like they classically are, just like the feet. And it helps them stand out from the rest of the body. The Power of the Primes one, something I really didn't like about that version of Abominus is that all the hand pieces here, the Prime Armors, they color match the limbs that they belong to, which might look good in the individual modes, but then it makes him look just a little bit messier in combined mode, because you no longer have hands that, match colors to the feet. They're just whatever color the arms are. Now, maybe that does make them look a little more natural, but personally, I like it when that, that combiner kibble stands out, right? That's always kind of been a thing, is that the kibble is like its own color and it all matches, the hands and feet match, the chest plate usually matches. So I felt that that was a bit of a loss here with this version. Also, because the Prime Armor / hands become the heel spurs for the feet, that means the feet, the back of them aren't the same color as the front, they're different colors. Really messy looking. So I do feel that the new hands and feet are a massive improvement, not just structurally, but aesthetically too. Now, because I did this for Volcanicus, I feel like I have to do it here. I've gone and swapped the accessories between the two combiners, right? So the hands and feet, weapons, all that. Now, unfortunately, this can't be a complete swap because, as you know, the chest pieces aren't compatible. So his little chest shield just has to stay on. It can't attach to this thing. Plus, if I took it off, he'd just have a big gaping hole for a chest. So, yeah, you can't fully swap them like you can the two different versions of Volcanicus, but you can get them most of the way there. And, this right here is really, really nice looking. Like, this is what I wanted in Power of the Primes. Matching hands, posable hands, wide feet for a good balance and stance control. That is what I wanted, and that's what most people wanted. Sadly, Power of the Primes fell short there. Now, I am sure that if you're enterprising enough and you have the right tools and the right know-how, you can probably use like a pin knocking set to actually swap these, like that piece and then the armature that holds this on. If you really want to go like full swap, right? If you want your ultimate Abominus, but you want it with the toy colors, I'm sure you can get that off and get this off and just swap them around and give this guy the full chest piece too. And that would be, in my opinion, the ultimate version of Abominus. They use a lot of the same plastic colors, so like the magenta already works for him. It's the same as, what you see here. This would all work out very, very well. A lot better than, when we swapped the Volcanicuses, because unfortunately the gold and stuff on the newer pieces really didn't match the more toy-accurate colors on the old combiner. Here, these guys are a much closer color match, so yeah, you can really have some fun with this whole thing. Now, personally, I don't have the knowledge or the will to try to, knock pins out of, these things and potentially break them. So this is as far as I'm going to take it. But again, if you're feeling brave and you have both of these, have at it. In fact, I'd love to see a picture of it. I'd love to see this guy with that chest piece. I don't know if anyone's ever done it, but it would be really cool to see. And for our final group shot tonight, I want to display Abominus with all of the other Generation Selects combiners. Now, this whole Generation Selects combiner set thing has been a bit of a weird trip. So it started out with something very new and interesting, and we got, King Poseidon, combiner that hadn't been done in the Combiner Wars system. And even though, all the figures are retools, they were incredibly heavy retools. So he was more or less a brand new combiner. Then you got, like, his built-in recolor, God Neptune, who was, interestingly enough, a Beast Wars character, despite looking exactly like a Decepticon. And then with our final two, we got redos of the two Power of the Primes combiners, the two complete ones anyway. So, they started with Volcanicus and gave him, like, the cartoon treatment, all new feet, hands, all that, those really big swords, extra, like, chest filler accessories. And then finally they tackled Abominus. So this Generation Selects thing has been all over the place. You get brand new combiners, recolors, revisits of older combiners. It's as if the designers were just kind of fulfilling a wish list of things they wish they had done, you know, prior to the end of Prime Wars. Now, sadly, there are still some combiners, both Scramble City or adjacent, that still haven't been done. And I don't know if they will be done because I think, you know, they're pretty much done with this era of combiners. But we're still missing a Generation 2 Defensor to go with the other G2 recolors. We're missing Guard City, another Defensor recolor. We're missing Battle Gaia, the final Bruticus recolor. And then there were some other combiners that had been pre-tooled into some molds that we never got to see. The Dinobots were being pre-tooled into what looked like some members of Dino King from the Japanese Generation 1 series. And then some members of Abominus here looked like they were being pre-tooled to become parts of Monstructor. Now, Monstructor, Dino King, they're not actually Scramble City type combiners. But you could make it work. Now, you know, I don't know what their plans were. We only got to see, like, extra toolings on Limbots. I don't know how they would have handled the torsos, right? Because for those guys to be accurate, you would have to have 2 robot torsos. And I don't know if they were willing to put down the budget to create something like that. I mean, they sure didn't do it for Lio Kaiser. They just gave him some weird, you know, Skylings recolor and called it a day. So unfortunately, they may have just done the same thing for any potential Monstructor, Dino King, anything like that. Maybe not. Maybe they actually had some plans or hopes to create, you know, 2 robots that combine into a torso. Who knows? We'll never know. I'm sure it's like, you know, locked away, Hasbro secret. They're never going to tell us, except for maybe years and years later when, like, retired members of the design team show up for cons. Maybe they'll tell us then, but I wouldn't expect to find out anytime soon. Now, of course, you know, me going through all this in my head, it's just a wish list. I mean, we got so many combiners, both old and new, that I'm more or less satisfied with everything that we've seen in this era of combiners. Anything that would be added on top of it would really just be a nice bonus. And this completes our very delayed look at the Generation Selects Abominus. Overall, I absolutely love this thing. By far the best version of Abominus we've ever had. Now, while I personally do not like his colors as much as the Power of the Primes one, there's no denying that structurally he is the superior of the two. And is really just the only really good upgrade of this character we've ever had. I mean, admittedly, he's, you know, not a combiner that gets revisited very often. I mean, it's really like, you know, the Generations one here, a Transformers Prime, a little tiny weird looking thing, and then the G1. So not a lot of options, but, you know, we finally took what they started in Power of the Primes and just pretty much perfected it. Still would prefer a white helmet, but, you know, whatever. And, you know, as far as we know, he is the final Generation Selects combiner. I don't think they're doing any more after this, sadly. You know, we had our King Neptune, or King Poseidon and God Neptune. Then we had Volcanicus, and we had Abominus. I think they're done. You know, now we've fully moved from Prime Wars molds and all that into War for Seibertron and then Legacy. Legacy's doing its take on Menasor now. So I think they're leaving. I think he was like the death knell for the Combiner War system. I don't think we're going to see anymore, which is unfortunate because I really think it has a lot of potential. There are some kinks that need to be worked out. The combiner joints, like the ratchets in them, they need to be better. They need to not have as much give as they do. Joints for like arm bots, you know, if they ever revisit this, need to be like ratcheted and stronger. There are some things they can do to improve on it, but I don't think they should have scrapped the system. I think that universal, you know, connector piece and all that, the universal limb swapping was amazing. I mean, Combiner Wars, Power of the Primes, and now Generation Selects, it was like a renaissance for combiners. And just because it had its issues, I feel like they're just kind of abandoning it now and moving on to different methods. I think it's a shame. I don't like seeing all these really cool combiners left in the dust. But, you know, they're going to go out. I feel like they went out on a high note because this Abominus toy, you You know, very stable, very cool looking, just very satisfying in like every way. So I'm happy I got it. Again, I apologize it took me so very, very long to actually get this. I mean, what's it been, a year, I think, since I got this thing? And it's just been sitting there, like, waiting for me to review it. So, you know, finally, this guy can go up on the shelf. The Power of the Primes one can go back on his shelf after so long. And we can, I guess, just close this chapter and, you know, see what's in store. Maybe we'll get a new Abominus someday, and maybe he'll be better than this one. Maybe not. Who knows? But for what we have here, I'm very satisfied with it. I'm very happy I picked it up. If you guys, you know, were lucky enough to get this guy when he was available and affordable, good on you. I'm sure you're very happy with him. If you didn't get him and you're really determined to track one down and you have the funds and, you know, it's not going to hurt you financially, I'd pick him up. Like, if you want the best Abominus out there, this is it right here. And I don't think that you'll be dissatisfied. I think you'll enjoy this guy very, very much. Of course, that is just my take on this Abominus. Now I want to know what you all think of this toy. Did you pick this thing up when it was available? And if you did, you know, are you very happy that you got it? Or did you not get it, but maybe you have the Power of the Primes one and you're good with that one? Or maybe you just don't want this at all. Maybe it's too expensive. Any and all feedback is always welcome in the comments section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this very long-awaited look at the Transformers Generation Selects Abominus. With all that said, I will see you next time.